A bold flight attendant strode confidently down the aisle, her gaze fixed on a reserved young boy seated in first class. With a dramatic pause and arms crossed, she posed a question that would send shockwaves through the cabin. "Where are your parents?" In a swift and unexpected turn, she compelled him to vacate his seat and march to the back of the plane, under the watchful eyes of every passenger. What she didn't realize, however, was that the boy's mother was no ordinary traveler. She was the owner of the entire airline. The events that followed left everyone on board utterly speechless. Before we dive into this riveting tale, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Liam Bennett sat quietly in his seat, his small hands gripping the armrests as the plane filled with the sounds of passengers settling in. Although his mother had urged him to be brave and relish every moment, the solitude of first class sent unexpected shivers down his spine. The seat, a vast, plush expanse, seemed to envelop him in a gentle, yet intimidating cocoon, far removed from the familiar comfort he once knew. As the welcoming screen flickered softly before him, Liam's heart fluttered with both excitement and trepidation. He fumbled into his backpack for his cherished headphones, clinging to the thought that a favorite movie might dissolve his unease. But just as he reached for comfort, an imposing presence descended upon his quiet bubble. A tall flight attendant, Emily Collins, stood in the aisle, her arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on him. Her uniform was crisp, her expression unreadable, but something about the way she looked at him made his stomach tighten. She tilted her head slightly. Her voice, polite but firm, said, "Are you lost, sweetie?" Liam Bennett looked up, confused. "No, this is my seat," he said, pointing to the small ticket tucked under the screen in front of him. He had checked it twice before sitting down just to be sure. Emily Collins didn't even glance at it. Instead, she gave a small, forced smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "First class is for reserved passengers only," she said. "Where are your parents?" His hands tightened around his headphones. "I'm flying alone," he said quietly. "I have a ticket." Emily Collins' eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she found that hard to believe. She held out her hand. "Let me see it, sweetheart." He hesitated but did as he was told, digging into his pocket and handing her the ticket his mother had given him. He watched as her eyes scanned it, her lips pressing into a thin line. The ticket was real, he knew that, but something in her expression made it clear that she still wasn't convinced. "How did you get this ticket?" she asked. Liam Bennett blinked. "My mom bought it for me." The forced smile vanished, and with it, the feigned sweetness in her tone. "Listen," she said as she lowered herself to his level. "I don't know what happened, but there must be some mistake. First class is reserved for our high-paying passengers. You'll need to move to the back." Heat rushed to his cheeks as his throat tightened. "But this is my seat," he whispered. Emily Collins straightened, shaking her head. "Come on now," she said a little louder. "Let's not make a scene. Gather your things and I'll find you a seat where you belong." The words cut deep, leaving a lingering sting of rejection. A heavy silence filled the space around him as he realized dozens of eyes were silently witnessing his discomfort. Some feigning disinterest, others fixated with curiosity or subtle disapproval. With a hesitant sigh, he gathered his backpack and unbuckled his seatbelt. His hands trembled and his legs wavered as he stepped into the aisle, each movement burdened by the weight of humiliation. Emily Collins had already turned toward the galley, her back a final reminder of the separation imposed on him. Making his way toward the back of the plane, Liam fumbled for his phone with trembling fingers and quickly typed a message. Ava, they made me leave my seat. Collapsing into an economy seat, he clutched his phone as if it were a lifeline. His heart pounded in his chest while confusion and a sense of injustice mingled with every breath he took. Despite having meticulously checked his ticket and followed every rule, the inexplicable removal left him questioning everything he knew about fairness. The silent stares of other passengers burned into his memory, each glance a reminder of his isolation. Not one person stepped forward to offer help or comfort. Their muted observations echoed louder than any kind word could. With each passing second, his anxiety grew as he waited for his mother's reply, imagining her busy day and the unexpected shock she'd feel reading his message. The absence of a response deepened his loneliness, leaving him to wrestle with the sting of betrayal in silence. A man in the seat next to him cleared his throat. "Everything all right, buddy?" he asked, giving Liam Bennett a sideways glance. His voice wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't particularly kind either. Liam Bennett turned away, pressing himself closer to the window. Outside, the runway stretched out beneath the golden afternoon sky. Ground crew scurried about, meticulously preparing the aircraft for takeoff as the engines droned softly beneath him. A constant reminder that soon he'd be suspended high above the earth with no remedy for his current predicament. His phone vibrated in his hand, jolting him from his spiraling thoughts. His mother had replied, "What do you mean they made you leave your seat?" Liam Bennett quickly typed back. The flight attendant said, "I didn't belong in first class. She made me move to the back." For what felt like an eternity, silence enveloped his screen until the familiar trio of dots signaled her reply. "What's the flight number?" flashed as she began typing once again. His pulse quickened as he fumbled to confirm the number on his boarding pass, his fingers moving in a jittery haste. Although he had always admired his mother's composed and decisive way of handling crises, the crispness in her inquiry made his chest constrict in apprehension. The response came with unexpected rapidity. "Stay where you are. Don't worry about anything." A slow exhale escaped him, yet the lingering pressure in his chest persisted, as if her words carried an unspoken promise of swift retribution. In that moment, he could almost hear the undercurrent in her tone, a cool calm interlaced with a restrained anger that was both comforting and alarming. His mother, a pillar of strength who never resorted to raised voices, now conveyed through text an urgency that left him questioning everything. Deep down, he suspected that Emily Collins had gravely misjudged the situation and that her actions would soon come back to haunt her. Liam Bennett's eyes remained fixed on the glowing screen. The directive, "Stay where you are, don't worry about anything," burning into his consciousness even as anxiety churned within him. He shifted uneasily in his seat, stealing glances at the flight attendants as they methodically ensured every detail was in order. Emily Collins was nowhere in sight. Maybe she had gone back to first class, where she thought he didn't belong. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that they would be taking off soon. Liam Bennett fastened his seatbelt, his hands still shaking slightly. He hated how small he felt, how embarrassed he had become. He had never wanted attention. He just wanted to sit in the seat his mother had bought for him from the front of the plane. Emily Collins reappeared, walking through first class with her usual confidence. She adjusted a tray on a passenger's table, smiling at the man in a tailored suit as she offered him another drink. Liam Bennett watched as she moved with ease, completely unbothered, as if she hadn't just humiliated a child in front of an entire plane. In the galley, a younger flight attendant, Lulu, hesitated before speaking. "Hey, was there something wrong with that boy's ticket?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Emily Collins barely looked up as she smoothed her uniform. "It doesn't seem right," she said simply. "Probably a mistake in the system." Lulu frowned. "But you checked it, right?" Emily Collins waved a hand. "I've been doing this for years. I can tell when someone's out of place. You think a kid like that is flying first class alone? Come on." Lulu hesitated. She had been on enough flights to know that kids flew first class all the time. It wasn't that unusual. And something about the way Emily Collins said it, a kid like that, made her uncomfortable. But she kept quiet. Emily Collins had been with the airline for a long time. Arguing with her wasn't a smart move. The flight attendants finished their final checks, and soon the plane began to roll down the runway. Liam Bennett clenched his hands into fists as the aircraft lifted into the air, the pressure making his ears pop. His mother's words repeated in his head, "Don't worry about anything." But he knew better. Something was about to happen, and this flight was going to be anything but normal. The plane climbed higher, breaking through the clouds, but Liam Bennett barely noticed. His mind was still stuck on what had happened. Inside the cramped cabin of economy, every detail seemed to echo his inner turmoil. The seat now felt painfully tight, as if it were shrinking with each passing moment, and the faint memory of the spacious first-class stairs still lingered with him, a bittersweet reminder of a place he'd been rejected from. Around him, the other passengers were lost in their own worlds, absorbed in their flights and conversations, leaving him isolated in his discomfort. He exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on his phone as he repeatedly checked for another message from his mother. His thumb hovered over the screen, tempted to ask what her next move would be, but deep down he knew that questioning her was futile. If she promised to take care of it, then she always did. Meanwhile, at the front of the plane, Emily Collins moved through first class with a confident, almost rehearsed grace. She poured drinks, adjusted trays, and offered polite smiles to passengers who barely met her gaze. This was her domain, a world of order and precision she had meticulously maintained over her 15 years of service. In her mind, the sanctity of first class was inviolable, reserved for business executives, affluent travelers, and those who truly understood its protocol. To her, a solitary boy in a hoodie was an anomaly, a rule breaker among the privileged. She recalled similar incidents of unauthorized upgrades and felt a surge of self-assurance at having prevented yet another potential disruption. Unbeknownst to her, however, her actions had set in motion consequences far beyond a simple seating error. Back in economy, Liam Bennett sat stiffly by the window, lost in a haze of conflicting emotions. Scrolling through his phone did little to distract him. Rather, it only amplified the feeling of insignificance that weighed on him. He recalled the strength and sacrifice of his mother, how tirelessly she worked to ensure he never felt less than worthy. Her words had always encouraged him to walk tall and proud, yet now he wondered how one could maintain such pride when a stranger's cold judgment could so swiftly decide one's place in the world. Suddenly, his phone vibrated, slicing through his reverie with a new message. "Mom just spoke to the airline. Keep your phone close." Liam Bennett's heart jumped. He sat up straighter, his fingers tightening around the device. He wasn't sure what she meant exactly, but he knew one thing. This wasn't over. At that very moment, in a high-rise office thousands of miles away, Ava Bennett, CEO of the airline, stood behind her desk, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, steely with determination, swept over the documents spread before her as a conference call blared in the background. Every word she uttered carried the weight of experience and raw emotion, a mixture of indignation and protective resolve. "Let me be very clear," she declared, her tone calm but dangerously sharp. "My son was removed from his seat without cause. Your crew member made that decision without checking the manifest, without verifying the ticket. and without any justification beyond her own assumptions. The silence on the other end was quickly shattered by a hesitant response. "Miss Bennett, I understand your concern, but nothing," she interrupted smoothly. "I want the name of the flight attendant responsible. I want to know exactly what she said to him, and I want a full report on my desk before that plane lands." Her words, laced with both authority and personal anguish, left little room for negotiation. Nearby, Ethan Brooks shifted uncomfortably, his concern mingling with the gravity of the moment. "Should I notify the captain?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. In that instant, Ava Bennett paused. A brief moment of vulnerability hidden beneath her iron facade. She exhaled slowly, pressing her fingers against her temples as memories of past battles and unyielding challenges resurfaced. Every struggle against discrimination, every uphill fight to claim her space in an industry that had never fully embraced her, echoed in her mind. This was different. It was deeply personal. Thousands of feet above the ground, her son was caught in a storm of injustice, and though she could not be by his side physically, she was determined to reclaim control. Back aboard the plane, the quiet hum of routine was suddenly interrupted as 30 minutes into the flight, while passengers sipped their drinks and scrolled through their screens, the intercom crackled to life. "Emily Collins, please report to the cockpit immediately." The words sent a ripple through the cabin. A few passengers glanced up, sensing something unusual. Flight attendants didn't just get called to the cockpit like that. Liam Bennett looked up, his heartbeat picking up speed. Emily Collins paused after dabbing her hands on a napkin, a flicker of concern hidden beneath her professional mask. With a calm air that barely betrayed the undercurrent of tension, she assumed it was merely a standard check, a routine update the captain might require. Her confident stride toward the front of the plane was marked by the soft, rhythmic click of her heels on the carpeted floor, each step unknowingly carrying her toward a turning point she couldn't yet fathom. As she adjusted her uniform in the narrow corridor leading to the cockpit, an uneasy silence mingled with the constant hum of the engines, a subtle prelude to an unfolding crisis. Inside the cockpit, a faint glow emanated from the control panel as the atmosphere grew charged with silent urgency. John Mason, normally the epitome of seasoned calm, now wore an expression sharpened by worry and restraint. Even Blake, the co-pilot, stole furtive glances at the video call buzzing on the in-flight phone screen, a call that brought with it a face both familiar and formidable. "Do Emily Collins," came the voice. "Captain," she greeted, keeping her voice professional. "You needed me." John Mason exhaled, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "Emily Collins, we have a situation. A serious one." She frowned, fidgeting in confusion. "Of course, Captain, how can I help?" Ava Bennett's voice came through the speaker, clear and precise, as she explained. "Why did you remove my son from first class?" Emily Collins blinked. I'm sorry." John Mason didn't say a word. He just leaned back, arms crossed, letting Ava Bennett do the talking. "My son, Liam Bennett," Ava Bennett continued, her voice controlled but carrying a dangerous edge. "The 10-year-old boy you humiliated in front of an entire cabin, the boy whose ticket you didn't bother verifying before you sent him to economy." Emily Collins' throat went dry. I was just following standard procedure," she tried, forcing a small, professional smile. "Sometimes passengers, especially children, end up in the wrong section. I was only ensuring that—" "Don't insult me," Ava Bennett cut in sharply. "We both know that's not what happened." Emily Collins's face burned. She had been in situations before where passengers argued over seating, but this was different. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. She wasn't dealing with just any passenger, she was dealing with the woman who owned the airline. John Mason finally spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Did you check the manifest before removing him from his seat?" Emily Collins hesitated. Yes or no?" Ava Bennett pressed. "No." The silence that followed was suffocating. John Mason shook his head. "You didn't verify his name. You didn't confirm his ticket. You made a decision based on… what? A gut feeling on his appearance?" Emily Collins could feel her heart pounding now. It was a misunderstanding, I thought." "You thought he didn't belong?" Ava Bennett finished for her. The words hit like a slap. Emily Collins opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no way out of this. Blake glanced at John Mason, waiting for direction. John Mason sighed, rubbing his temple before speaking again. "Emily Collins, per orders from corporate, you are to personally escort Liam Bennett back to his original seat immediately," he said, his voice firm, "and you will do so with a full apology. A real one." Emily Collins felt her breath hitch. She had never been ordered to publicly apologize to a passenger before, and now she was expected to walk through the plane, admit her mistake in front of everyone, and return the boy to first class. Her face burned with humiliation. "Captain," she started, keeping her voice low, "perhaps we could handle this after landing?" "That wasn't a request," Ava Bennett interrupted. Emily Collins clenched her jaw. "Understood," she muttered. She turned stiffly and stepped out of the cockpit, her hands clammy. Every step she took back toward the cabin felt heavier, as if the weight of her mistake were pressing down on her. Liam Bennett sat in his economy seat, still gripping his phone, his mother's last message replaying in his mind. He had no idea what she had done or what strings she had pulled from the ground, but he could feel it, the shift in the air. Then he heard it, a voice clearing a throat beside him. He looked up, and there she was. Emily Collins. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't standing with that stiff, professional confidence. Instead, she looked uneasy. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice quieter than before, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat." Liam Bennett didn't move right away. He could feel other passengers watching, their eyes flicking between him and the flight attendant. Some of them had seen what happened earlier, had watched as she sent him to the back without a second thought. Now, she was standing in front of him, forced to undo what she had done. "Why was it a misunderstanding?" Liam Bennett asked, his voice steady. Emily Collins stiffened. She wasn't expecting him to push back. I should have checked your ticket properly," she admitted, her voice tight. "And I apologize." It didn't sound natural, it sounded like she was being made to say it. Liam Bennett studied her for a long moment before unbuckling his seatbelt. He stood, slinging his backpack over his shoulder as he followed Emily Collins through the aisle. Passengers whispered. Some pretended not to notice, others stole quick glances, but no one, not a single person, had spoken up when she kicked him out. He walked back into first class, the luxury of it feeling completely different now. He slid into his original seat, placing his backpack down calmly. Emily Collins lingered awkwardly for a second before mumbling, "If you need anything, let me know." Liam Bennett didn't reply. He simply reached for his phone and typed a message. "I'm back in first class." The reply came seconds later. "Mom, good. Now sit tight, I'll handle the rest." Liam Bennett leaned back into his seat. Something told him that Emily Collins' problems were just beginning. Emily Collins turned on her heel and walked back toward the galley, but she could feel the weight of every passenger's gaze on her. She had never felt this way before, not in all her years of working flights. Normally, she was the one in control, the one who called the shots, the one who decided what was appropriate in her cabin. But now she wasn't in control at all. As she reached the first-class service area, she gripped the edge of the counter, her fingers pressing into the polish. She needed a moment to breathe, to collect herself. But her mind was racing. Passengers had watched her escort Liam Bennett back. They had heard her apology. They had witnessed her mistake. She clenched her jaw. How could this have happened? A voice broke through her thoughts. "You all right?" Emily Collins turned to see Lulu, the younger flight attendant, standing near the coffee machine, her arms crossed. There was something unreadable in her expression, something between curiosity and quiet judgment. Emily Collins forced a tight smile. "Of course," she said stiffly. Lulu didn't move. She didn't blink. "You got called to the cockpit for that, didn't you?" Emily Collins inhaled slowly through her nose. "I don't see how that's any of your concern." Lulu tilted her head slightly. "It's everyone's concern when the CEO of the airline gets involved." The words hit like a slap. Emily Collins' stomach twisted. So everyone knew. Lulu leaned against the counter. "I'm just saying," he continued, "I've worked a lot of flights, and I've never seen a first-class passenger get moved, unless their ticket was invalid. His wasn't, was it?" Emily Collins swallowed hard. "Lulu," she said sharply, "maybe focus on doing your job." Lulu gave a small shrug. "Sure thing, Emily Collins," she said, but there was a hint in her voice, something that made it clear she wasn't fooled by the act. Emily Collins turned away, smoothing down her uniform. She needed to compose herself. This wasn't over. Maybe she had been forced to apologize, maybe she had been humiliated, but she could still recover. She just needed to make it through the flight. Meanwhile, in first class, Liam Bennett sat quietly, staring at his phone. His mother hadn't sent another message yet, but he didn't need one to know she was still handling things. He could feel it. The energy in the cabin had shifted. Before, the flight attendants had barely glanced at him. Now they avoided his eye contact completely. They moved stiffly, as if they were suddenly aware that every action they took could be watched, reported, and judged. It wasn't just the crew. Passengers who had ignored him before were now whispering to each other, sneaking glances when they thought he wouldn't notice. He could feel the embarrassment that had burned inside him earlier starting to fade, replaced by something else, something he wasn't used to feeling. Power. For the first time in hours, he didn't feel small. 20 minutes later, the in-flight phone rang in the cockpit. John Mason picked up the receiver, pressing it to his ear. "Captain, speaking." The voice on the other end was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. "Captain, this is Ethan Brooks from corporate," the voice said. "Liam Bennett has been involved in an incident on board your flight, effective immediately. Emily Collins is to be placed on suspension upon landing." John Mason let out a slow breath, closing his eyes for a brief second. "I wasn't surprised," he said. "Understood," he added. Ethan Brooks continued. "She will be escorted for questioning as soon as the aircraft arrives at the gate. Additionally, corporate has requested that Liam Bennett receive priority service for the remainder of the flight." John Mason nodded. I'll make sure that happens. One more thing, Ethan Brooks added. Bennett would like a direct report from you regarding how the situation was handled. She wants details. That last part wasn't a request. John Mason had flown thousands of flights in his career. He had seen plenty of incidents, entitled passengers, difficult crew members, situations that escalated too quickly. But this was something different. This was about consequences. As he hung up the phone, he glanced at Blake. Well, he muttered, Emily Collins's day is about to get a whole lot worse. Back in the galley, Emily Collins' world began to crumble. She was pouring coffee when Lulu approached again, this time holding the in-flight phone in her hand. Call for you, Lulu said. Simply extending the receiver, Emily Collins took it, pressing it to her ear. This is Emily Collins. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and left no room for argument. Upon landing, you will be required to report directly to the operations office for an immediate review of your conduct. You are not to leave the airport until further notice. Security will be waiting at the gate. Emily Collins felt her stomach drop. I don't understand, she stammered. The voice didn't change. This is per executive orders from Ava Bennett herself. You will comply, do you understand? Emily Collins's throat tightened. Understood, she whispered. The line went dead. Lulu was still standing there when Emily Collins lowered the phone. Bad news? Lulu asked, her voice light but her eyes knowing. Emily Collins didn't answer. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot down. The feeling she had earlier, the unease, the discomfort, had now turned into something much worse. Panic. For the first time since she had made that split-second decision to remove Liam Bennett from first class, she realized just how badly she had miscalculated. She had assumed he was just another passenger. She had assumed no one would question her decision. She had assumed she could get away with it. She had been wrong, and now she was about to pay the price. Emily Collins stood frozen in the galley, gripping the counter as the weight of the situation crashed down on her. The low drone of the engines, the delicate clink of glasses, and the murmured conversations of passengers faded into a distant, indifferent hum as her thoughts spiraled. Every beat of her heart pounded like a drum in her ears, each throb a reminder of the gravity of what was unfolding. Despite her years of experience handling unruly passengers, last-minute scrambles, and unforeseen turbulence both in the skies and within her crew, nothing had prepared her for this moment. A sudden, stark confrontation with security, unanticipated questioning, and the looming threat of suspension. A gut-wrenching knot churned in her stomach as reality crashed over her. Nearby, Lulu's observant gaze never wavered, silently urging Emily to reveal even a hint of her inner turmoil. With steely resolve, Emily fought to mask her shock, her face a mask of neutrality as she whispered, "I need a minute," before her voice could betray her panic. Turning on her heel, she slipped past the curtains into the cramped crew rest area, a space so tight it amplified the confines of her mounting distress. Pressing her hands against the cool metal wall, she drew in a trembling breath, desperate for a moment to gather her scattered thoughts and forge a plan. In that fragile pause, fleeting ideas flickered through her mind. Perhaps she could speak with the captain to explain the mix-up or preempt the fallout before the plane touched down. Yet, beneath the surface of these tentative schemes, a stark truth resonated. She had overstepped her bounds by ejecting a rightful first-class passenger, subjecting a young boy to public humiliation and, in doing so, igniting the fury of the airline's most formidable leader. She clenched her jaw. How had she let this happen? Meanwhile, in first class, Liam Bennett sat in his seat, stretching out his legs, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Just hours ago, he had felt helpless, small, invisible. Now he could feel the energy around him shifting. The first-class attendants were suddenly attentive, checking on him more than they checked on anyone else. They asked if he needed more snacks, if he was comfortable, if he wanted a different drink. He noticed the change, but he said little. Instead, he just nodded quietly, sipping his juice, letting them feel the weight of their own discomfort. It wasn't about free drinks. It wasn't about extra service. It was about the fact that the only reason they were paying attention now was because of who his mother was. He thought about that as he glanced around the cabin. Some passengers wouldn't meet his eyes. Others were sneaking glances, watching him out of the corners of their eyes, as if realizing they had witnessed something bigger than just a kid getting moved to economy. One man sitting across the aisle cleared his throat. He looked like a businessman, his suit perfectly pressed, his wristwatch expensive. He leaned slightly toward Liam Bennett, speaking in a voice just loud enough to be heard. I saw what happened earlier." Liam Bennett turned his head, waiting. The man shifted uncomfortably. "That was unfortunate." Liam Bennett blinked. The man nodded stiffly. "Yes, well, I imagine it was a misunderstanding." Liam Bennett studied him for a second before tilting his head. "Did you think it was a misunderstanding when she told me to move?" The man hesitated. Liam Bennett didn't break eye contact. "Did you think it was a misunderstanding when nobody said anything?" The man swallowed, his fingers tightening around the stem of his wine glass. He let out a small, awkward chuckle. "Well, I suppose..." The man Liam Bennett cut in. The businessman exhaled and looked down at his lap, suddenly very interested in the safety pamphlet he had ignored earlier. Liam Bennett turned back to his window, letting the silence stretch. This wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about all the people who had watched it happen and said nothing. Back in the cockpit, John Mason sat in his chair, eyes on the horizon, his hands resting on the controls, but his mind was elsewhere. He had been flying for over 20 years. He had seen nearly everything. Fist fights, entitled passengers demanding ridiculous treatment, even once having to physically remove someone from the cockpit for trying to argue about turbulence. But this was different. This wasn't just about a difficult flight attendant. This was about a decision made in seconds that could destroy someone's career. And worse, it was justified. The moment he had spoken to corporate. And he heard Ava Bennett's voice. He knew Emily Collins was finished. You didn't humiliate the owner's child and walk away from it. Still, there was something about this whole situation that left a bitter taste in his mouth. He didn't feel sorry for Emily Collins. She had made a mistake, and now she was facing the consequences. But part of him wondered how many times things like this happened on other flights when there wasn't someone like Ava Bennett to step in. How many times had people been treated unfairly and had no one to fight for them? He exhaled through his nose. There was nothing left to do now except wait for landing. And he had a feeling this flight was going to be talked about in the industry for a long time. In the galley, Emily Collins faced reality. She checked the time. Less than an hour was left before they landed. Her hands were shaking as she smoothed her uniform, forcing herself to take steady breaths. She had to keep it together, but she already knew the truth. She had lost. She had spent years commanding respect, making sure people knew that she was the one in charge, and now she was the one being escorted off the plane, like a problem that needed to be handled. The irony made her sick. She wiped her hands on a napkin, her mouth dry. The crew around her knew. She could feel it in the way they moved, in the way they avoided speaking to her directly. The power she once held over them was gone. Lulu passed by, glancing at her before pausing. "You should probably sit down before we land," Lulu said, her voice calm. Emily Collins shot her a sharp look. "I don't need your advice." Lulu shrugged. "Suit yourself." Emily Collins clenched her fists. She wanted to yell, to snap, to demand that people respect her like they always had. But she couldn't. Not anymore. Instead, she stood in silence, staring at the clock, waiting for the moment the plane touched down, when she would have to face what came next. Liam Bennett's final message before landing arrived as his phone vibrated with a new text from his mother. "Mom, we land in 30 minutes. Security will be waiting at the gate. Sit tight." Liam Bennett smirked slightly. He wasn't scared anymore. Emily Collins had tried to make him feel like he didn't belong, but now she was the one who didn't belong. And she was about to find out exactly what that felt like. The plane began its slow descent, dipping beneath the thick clouds as the city below came into view. The seatbelt sign dinged, and a flight attendant's voice echoed through the cabin, reminding passengers to remain seated, with their tray tables upright. Liam Bennett buckled his seatbelt, but his mind wasn't on the landing. His phone was still in his hand, his mother's last message glowing on the screen. "Security will be waiting at the gate." It wasn't just a statement. It was a promise. He glanced around first class, watching as some passengers packed up their things, others stretched out as if this had been just another flight. But a few, the ones who had seen everything unfold, seemed uneasy. They shifted in their seats, their eyes flicking toward the front of the plane where Emily Collins had disappeared into the galley. Liam Bennett could still feel the shift in energy around him, the silence, the careful avoidance. Before, he had been just another passenger, a kid that nobody noticed. But now he was something else. Now they all knew who he was, and the way they looked at him now wasn't just curiosity, it was discomfort, because they had been silent when it mattered most. Emily Collins's panic set in as she gripped the counter, staring at the blank wall in front of her. She felt like she was suffocating. The moment the plane touched down, she knew what was coming. She would step off this aircraft, and waiting for her would be security, human resources representatives, executives, maybe even Ava Bennett herself. And what could she say? That she hadn't meant it, that it wasn't personal, that it was all just a mistake? Would that undo what she had done? Would that erase the way she had looked at that boy and decided in an instant that he didn't belong? Her breathing was shallow. She needed a way out. Maybe if she got ahead of it, she could control the narrative. She could say it had been a training error, maybe blame the system, say she was following protocol, that she had been doing what she thought was right. But even as the excuses formed in her head, she knew the truth. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and choices had consequences. Lulu stepped into the galley, glancing at her but saying nothing at first. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "You know what's coming, right?" Emily Collins swallowed hard. "I don't need a lecture," she began. "Lulu," the younger attendant interjected, leaning against the counter and crossing her arms. "You don't need a lecture, you need to start thinking about your next job." Emily Collins' fingers curled into fists. "It's not over yet." Lulu raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it?" Emily Collins opened her mouth, but no words came out, because they both knew the answer. The final announcement came as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. The local time is 3:45 p.m. Please remain seated until we have reached the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. On behalf of the crew, thank you for flying with us today." Liam Bennett exhaled slowly as the plane rumbled down the runway, slowing to a smooth stop outside. He could already see the terminal coming into view. At the gate, a small group of uniformed security officers stood waiting. Liam Bennett's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't afraid, he wasn't nervous, he was just waiting the walk of shame. Emily Collins' last flight. Passengers began gathering their bags, moving through the aisles as they prepared to exit first class. First class passengers always left first. A privilege that Emily Collins had once enforced with pride. But today she was the one who would be escorted off the plane. Lilu gave her a look, one that wasn't smug or cruel, but something close to pity. "You should go," Lilu said quietly. "Better to face it now than to let them drag you off like some kind of criminal." Emily Collins's throat was dry. She forced herself to step forward, moving toward the exit with stiff, robotic movements. The second she stepped through the door, the tension in the air thickened. The security officers didn't grab her, didn't say a word at first, but their presence alone was enough to send a clear message. This wasn't just a warning. This was the end. "Emily Collins," one of the men said, his voice firm but professional. "Come with us." She hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. Passengers who had ignored her earlier were now watching. Some looked surprised, others pretended not to notice. But Liam Bennett was still in his seat, watching her with the same quiet calm he had held through the entire flight. And that was worse than anger. Worse than yelling. That was undeniable proof that she had been wrong. With no other choice, Emily Collins stepped off the plane for the last time. Liam Bennett's final moments on the plane came as a different flight attendant, not Emily Collins, approached him. Her smile was forced and shaky. "Mr. Bennett, is there anything else we can get you before you leave?" she asked. Liam Bennett shook his head. "No, thank you." The woman nodded quickly and stepped aside, letting him pass as he moved through the terminal. He saw her standing tall, her arms crossed, waiting for Ava Bennett, his mother. And when she met his eyes, there was no anger, no frustration, just that calm authority she always carried, the kind that made people listen, the kind that made people respect her whether they wanted to or not. Liam Bennett walked up to her, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You okay?" she asked in a gentle voice. He nodded. "Yeah," she said, studying his face to make sure he meant it. "Good," she said finally. "Let's go." Together, they walked out of the terminal. Behind them, security led Emily Collins down a separate hallway. Her career, her reputation, destroyed by her mistake, a choice she would never be able to take back. Final words. Some lessons came easy, some lessons came hard. But for Emily Collins, this lesson came at 3,5,000 feet in the air, and by the time she realized her mistake, it was already too late. The terminal was bustling with passengers, voices blending into a steady hum as people hurried to their destinations. But for Liam Bennett, the world outside felt muted. Ava Bennett walked beside him, her stride confident, her expression unreadable. He knew that look well. It was the same look she had when she sat in board meetings, when she made high-stakes decisions, when people underestimated her. They passed security with the sound of rolling suitcases and boarding announcements filling the air. But Liam Bennett knew this wasn't over. His mother wasn't the kind of person who just let things go. She had fought her way to the top of the airline industry by ignoring situations like this. She had made a career out of fixing problems, and today, the problem had been Emily Collins. "Did she apologize?" Ava Bennett asked suddenly, not breaking her stride. Liam Bennett glanced up at her. Yeah, but only because she had to, he replied. Ava Bennett's lips pressed into a thin line. That's what I thought. They approached a set of sleek glass doors leading into a private executive lounge. A woman in a navy blue uniform stood at the entrance, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized Ava Bennett. She quickly stepped aside, pressing a button to let them in. Inside, the atmosphere was completely different. It was quieter, more controlled. The air smelled like fresh coffee and leather seats. Liam Bennett had been here before. This was where his mother handled serious business. And today was serious. A tall man in a crisp suit stood waiting inside. Ethan Brooks, head of corporate operations. He had been working for Ava Bennett for years, and while he was usually composed, today he looked tense. Ms. Bennett, Ethan Brooks greeted, straightening his tie. Everything has been arranged as per your instructions. Ava Bennett nodded once. Ethan Brooks hesitated for half a second before responding. She has been escorted to the internal review office. HR is handling the process, and she's been informed of her suspension. Liam Bennett tilted his head. What does that mean? He asked. It means, Ava Bennett said, looking directly at him, she won't be working on another flight anytime soon. Liam Bennett didn't react. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Ethan Brooks cleared his throat. We also have a statement prepared for the media in case this escalates. Liam Bennett blinked at the media. Ava Bennett sighed, rubbing her temple. It's already spreading, isn't it? Ethan Brooks nodded. Some passengers had posted about it on social media even before we landed. People were already asking questions. The fact that it involved your son means it's gaining traction. Liam Bennett felt something shift in his chest. He had known this was a big deal, but hearing that people were talking about it online made it feel different. Ava Bennett inhaled deeply before speaking again. What's the internal review saying? Ethan Brooks adjusted his suit jacket. They're still collecting statements, but it's not looking good for her. She made a direct decision based on assumption, no verification, no protocol followed. On top of that, she refused to acknowledge her mistake until she was forced to. Ava Bennett scoffed. Typical. Liam Bennett watched as his mother took control of the situation like it was just another business deal. He had always admired that about her, the way she commanded respect without ever raising her voice. Ethan Brooks hesitated again before speaking. Miss Bennett, we have to decide how far we want to take this. Ava Bennett looked at him, waiting. Ethan Brooks exhaled. Do we terminate her, or do we give her a chance to explain herself for the first time since we landed? Ava Bennett hesitated. Liam Bennett could see the wheels turning in her head. He knew what this meant. If she fired Emily Collins immediately, it would send a message to the entire airline industry that discrimination won't be tolerated. But if she let Emily Collins explain herself, it meant giving her a chance to take responsibility. Liam Bennett shifted in his seat. What do you think she'll do? Ava Bennett looked at him carefully. People like her, she shook her head, don't change unless they have no other choice. Liam Bennett swallowed. So you're going to fire her? Ava Bennett's eyes softened slightly. What do you think should happen? Liam Bennett hadn't expected that. He stared at his mother, then down at his hands. He hadn't really thought about it in that way. Did he want revenge? No. Did he want justice? Yes. Did he believe she deserved another chance? That was harder to answer. After a long moment, he finally spoke. She didn't just make a mistake, she made a choice. Ava Bennett nodded, waiting for him to continue. If she had just checked my ticket like she was supposed to, this never would have happened, Liam Bennett said in a steady voice. But she saw me and decided I didn't belong. She embarrassed me in front of the whole plane. And if you weren't my mom, she would have gotten away with it." Ethan Brooks shifted slightly, but didn't interrupt. Liam Bennett inhaled. She needs to understand that what she did was wrong, not because she got caught, but because it was wrong. Ava Bennett studied him for a moment, then leaned back. "All right then, here's what we'll do." Ethan Brooks perked up, waiting for instructions. "Emily Collins will be suspended indefinitely," Ava Bennett said. "She will undergo full bias training, and she will be required to personally issue a statement acknowledging what she did." Ethan Brooks nodded, taking notes. "If she refuses," Liam Bennett asked, "then she won't ever set foot on another one of my planes again," Ava Bennett said simply. Liam Bennett nodded slowly. "That seems fair." Ethan Brooks closed his notebook. "I'll make sure it's handled." Ava Bennett exhaled, rolling her shoulders. "Good. Then, come on, kid, let's get out of here." Liam Bennett stood, adjusting his backpack as they walked toward the exit. He glanced up at his mother. "You would have fired her, wouldn't you?" Ava Bennett smirked. "If it were up to me?" She shrugged. "Absolutely." Liam Bennett chuckled. "But you're giving her a chance." Ava Bennett looked at him with a small, knowing smile. "Number, you are." Liam Bennett thought about that as they stepped out of the lounge and back into the terminal. Today he had learned something important. His mother had power, but so did he, and sometimes power wasn't about punishment. Sometimes it was about making sure the lesson lasted. And for Emily Collins, that lesson was just beginning. In a small, windowless room inside the airline's operations office, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a cold glow on the plain gray walls. A single folder sat on the table in front of Emily Collins, unopened, but she didn't need to look inside to know what it contained. Statements from passengers, a formal complaint from corporate, and most damning of all, an official review of her conduct on Flight 217. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her back stiff. She wasn't in uniform anymore. The moment she had been escorted off the plane, they had relieved her of her duties. The humiliation still clung to her skin like a thick fog. The whispers, the stares, the way people had looked at her like she was nothing. She had walked off that plane like a criminal. A woman with 20 years of experience, a senior flight attendant. And now, sitting in this cold, empty room, she felt powerless. The door creaked open, and Ethan Brooks stepped inside, his sharp eyes scanning her for a moment before he sat across from her. He didn't speak right away. He placed his tablet on the table, swiped across the screen, then finally looked up. "Emily Collins," he began, his voice even but firm, "I assume you know why you're here." She swallowed, forcing herself to nod. Ethan tapped his fingers on the table. "Would you like to explain why you removed Liam Bennett from his seat without verifying his ticket?" Emily Collins's mouth felt dry. She had rehearsed what she would say in her head a dozen times since stepping off that plane. Practiced excuses, explanations, anything to make this seem like less than what it was. But now, sitting here under the weight of real consequences, she knew there was nothing she could say to fix this. Still, she tried. "I thought..." She licked her lips, her voice cracking. "I thought there was a mistake in the system. A child traveling alone in first class. It didn't seem..." She trailed off, realizing how hollow it sounded out loud. Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Didn't seem what, Emily Collins?" She clenched her hands together. "It didn't seem normal." "Normal?" Ethan's voice cooled by the second. "Would you have questioned him if he were white?" Emily Collins felt her stomach lurch. I don't know." Ethan's expression didn't change. I think you do. He inhaled sharply, gripping the fabric of her pants under the table. I never meant to. It doesn't matter, Emily Collins managed. Ethan cut in smoothly. Your actions. The room felt even smaller now, suffocating. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter now, but somehow even heavier. Let me paint the picture for you, Emily Collins. A young boy, 10 years old, boards the plane alone, with a perfectly valid ticket for first class. He sits in his seat, follows the rules, causes no issues. And then you, without verifying a single piece of information, publicly humiliate him, accuse him of not belonging, and force him to move to economy. Emily Collins's pulse pounded in her ears. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Now, tell me, what part of that do you think is okay? Emily Collins felt her throat tighten. He let the silence stretch between them before continuing. The truth is, you saw a little black boy sitting in first class and assumed without proof that he didn't belong there. She flinched, but she didn't argue because he was right. Ethan sighed, leaning back. Ava Bennett has agreed not to pursue legal action yet. However, the airline is prepared to suspend you indefinitely pending mandatory bias training, a full internal review, and a written public acknowledgement of your actions. Emily Collins blinked. Public acknowledgement? Ethan's face was unreadable. You will write a statement apologizing to Liam Bennett. It will be published internally for all airline employees to read, and it will be included in our upcoming bias training seminars as an example of what not to do. The shame burned in her chest like acid. You're making an example out of me, she whispered. Ethan didn't deny it. That's exactly what we're doing. Emily Collins exhaled shakily, looking away. A month ago, she had commanded authority. Passengers obeyed her, crew members respected her. She had believed herself to be good at her job, maybe even great, and now her name would be used as a warning. Ethan tapped on his tablet again, sliding it across the table toward her. Here's your statement draft. You can sign it or you can refuse. If you refuse, we'll move forward with termination. Emily Collins stared at the screen. The words were simple but damning. I, Emily Collins, take full responsibility for my actions on Flight 217. My decision to remove a first-class passenger without verifying their ticket was an act of discrimination, and I deeply regret the harm it caused. I apologize to Liam Bennett and his family, as well as the passengers and crew who witnessed my mistake. I am committed to undergoing training to ensure this never happens again. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through it. She hated this. She hated that she was here. She hated that this had happened to her. But deep down, beneath the humiliation and the bitterness, she knew this hadn't happened to her. She had done this to herself. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. Ethan Brooks watched her closely. This is your only chance to take responsibility, he said. Emily Collins inhaled shakily, then slowly pressed her thumb against the screen, signing her name. Ethan nodded once. Good choice. He stood, adjusting his suit. Someone will escort you out. You'll receive further instructions regarding your suspension and training. Emily Collins nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. Ethan took one last look at her. I hope you actually learn from this, Emily Collins, because next time, his voice dropped slightly, there won't be a second chance. With that, he turned and left, leaving Emily Collins alone in the cold, gray room. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding for the first time in her career. She had no control, no authority, no power, and the worst part was that she knew she had deserved it. Liam Bennett sat on the plush leather couch in his mother's private office at the airline's headquarters. The large, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, casting golden streaks of sunlight across the room. He had been here before, usually when his mom had late meetings and didn't want him waiting at home alone. But today was different. Today, he wasn't just visiting. He was at the center of something big. Ava Bennett sat behind her desk, her expression calm as she scrolled through her phone. Liam Bennett knew she was looking at updates from corporate, making sure everything had been handled exactly the way she wanted. She finally set her phone down and leaned back in her chair, looking at him. Emily Collins had signed the statement. Liam Bennett nodded, unsure of what to say. Ava Bennett studied him for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" she asked. He thought about it. The way Emily Collins had treated him, how for those few minutes he had felt less than, like he wasn't supposed to be there, like he had done something wrong just by existing in the wrong place. But now the tables had turned. Emily Collins was the one being forced to take responsibility. She was the one answering questions, the one whose career had been thrown into uncertainty. And yet, Liam Bennett didn't feel the satisfaction he thought he would. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I'm glad she's getting punished, but does it really change anything?" Ava Bennett tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Liam Bennett sighed, shifting in his seat. "She's only apologizing because she has to. That doesn't mean she actually learned anything." Ava Bennett exhaled softly, tapping her fingers on the desk. "That's the thing about people, baby. You can't force them to change. You can only give them the opportunity. And if they don't, then they get left behind," she said simply. Liam Bennett let that sink in. He wasn't sure if Emily Collins would ever truly understand what she had done. He wasn't even sure if she cared, but that didn't matter anymore, did it? Because this time she hadn't gotten away with it. His mother leaned forward. "You know what made me the most proud of you today?" Ava Bennett asked. Liam Bennett raised an eyebrow. "That I didn't lose my mind on the plane." Ava Bennett chuckled softly. "That too, but no. It was the way you handled this. You could have asked me to fire her. You could have asked for anything and I would have done it, but you chose to let her take accountability instead." Liam Bennett shrugged. "I just thought she should have to admit what she did." "And that's power," Ava Bennett said, her voice steady. "Not just punishing someone, but making sure they understand why they're being held accountable." Liam Bennett hadn't thought about it like that. Ava Bennett leaned back. "But the real question is, what do you want to do next?" Liam Bennett blinked. "What do you mean?" Ava Bennett smiled knowingly. "You do realize that this situation has already started to make waves, right?" Liam Bennett frowned. "Because of social media?" "Not just that." Ava Bennett tapped her nails against the desk. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened. It happens all the time, to kids like you, to adults, to people who don't have someone with power to fight for them." Liam Bennett listened carefully, not interrupting. "You were lucky," Ava Bennett continued. "You had me to step in, you had a name that carries weight. But what about the people who don't?" Liam Bennett hesitated. "What about them?" Ava Bennett studied him. "That's up to you," he frowned. "I don't get it." Ava Bennett sighed, pushing back from her desk. She walked to the window, looking down at the busy streets below. "When I was younger, I was treated differently in this industry because I was a black woman in a position of power. People assumed I wasn't supposed to be here, that I didn't belong. But every time someone tried to push me out, I pushed back harder. I worked twice as hard, 3 times as smart, and eventually they had no choice but to respect me." She turned back to him. That's why I fought for you today. Not just because you're my son, but because I've been where you were. And one day, you'll have to decide how you want to fight back." Liam Bennett sat with that for a long moment. "You think I should do something?" he asked. Ava Bennett shrugged. "Only if you want to, but just know your voice matters. People are already talking about what happened to you. The question is, what do you want to say back?" Liam Bennett felt a strange sensation in his chest. For the first time since stepping onto that plane, he realized that he wasn't just some kid who got kicked out of first class. He had a story, a voice, and people were listening. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do yet, but he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. That night, Liam Bennett lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his phone resting on his chest, as the entire day replayed in his head, from the moment he had stepped onto that plane, full of excitement, to the humiliating walk to the back of the aircraft. He had never felt so small, so powerless, but now the whole world knew what had happened. After leaving his mother's office, he had done something he never thought he would. He opened social media and searched his own name. He hadn't expected much, maybe a few mentions, a couple of passengers venting about the flight, but nothing big. He had been wrong. His name wasn't just mentioned, it was everywhere. A video had been posted by one of the passengers, a woman who had witnessed everything but said nothing at the time. She had started recording the moment Emily Collins told him he needed to move to the back, where he belonged. The video showed Liam Bennett standing up slowly, his backpack slung over his shoulders, his face unreadable as he walked past staring passengers, and the comments were on fire. To Brandon J., this kid was literally minding his business and got humiliated for no reason. Unreal. Sasha, the way no one spoke up is just as bad as what the flight attendant did. Truth Seeker 82. How many times does this happen when the person doesn't have a powerful parent to fight back? Flyer Girl 20. Boy, caught the airline until they make this right. It wasn't just a few people talking about it. There were thousands of comments. Thousands. Liam Bennett scrolled through post after post, his face growing hotter. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He wasn't sure if he liked it. It was overwhelming. And then he saw the news articles. Airline CEO's son removed from first class. Was it racial bias? Boy forced out of first class sparks outrage. Airline under fire for discrimination. Corporate bias training underway after incident on Flight 217. Liam Bennett sat up in bed, his heart throbbing in his chest. This wasn't just about his experience anymore, it was bigger. And his mother was right. People were listening. Meanwhile, across town, Emily Collins faced a different reality in a small apartment on the other side of the city. Emily Collins sat on her couch, her laptop open in front of her. The screen cast a pale glow across her face as she scrolled through the headlines. Her name wasn't in the articles yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Her stomach twisted as she read the comments. People wanted her fired. Some wanted her banned from ever working again. Others wanted the airline to release her name publicly. She had spent 20 years in the airline industry, and now all it had taken was one decision, one mistake, one assumption to bring it all crashing down. Her phone buzzed beside her. A message from an unknown number. "I hope you never get another job again, racist B." Emily Collins flinched. She hadn't expected this. She had expected corporate discipline, maybe even a suspension, but this... She felt like she was being hunted. She scrolled through her emails, her fingers trembling. There it was, a message from the airline's HR department. Subject: mandatory bias training and public statement submission. She opened it. Emily Collins, as part of your suspension, you are required to submit your official written statement acknowledging your actions on Flight 217. Failure to comply will result in termination. She stared at the words, her hands balled into fists. She knew she had made a mistake. She knew she should have checked the ticket first. But the way people were tearing her apart online made her chest tighten with something close to resentment. She had been wrong, she knew that. But did she really deserve this? She hesitated for a long moment before clicking reply. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could take full responsibility, she could admit everything, or she could try to save herself. Her jaw clenched. People were so quick to judge, so quick to condemn. Did anyone even care that she had been working for years, that she had once been praised for her service, that she had flown hundreds of flights without incident? She started typing. To whom it may concern, I deeply regret the events that took place on Flight 217. I sincerely apologize to Liam Bennett and his family for any misunderstanding that may have occurred. My actions were never meant to cause harm, and I am committed to learning and improving. She stared at the words. It wasn't a real apology, not really, but maybe it would be enough to save her job. She hit send, then closed her laptop and sat in the dark. Back in Liam Bennett's room, a decision was made. Liam tossed his phone onto the bed and stared at the ceiling again. This had all started because of one person's decision, but now he had a decision to make too. He could let the world take over his story, let the news, the strangers on the internet, and his mother's company handle it, or he could take control of it himself. He picked up his phone again, opening the camera app. For a second, he hesitated. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because he had never put himself out there like this before. But then he hit record. He looked into the camera and spoke. Hey everyone, I guess by now you've heard what happened to me on Flight 2017. His voice was steady. He wasn't shaking anymore. He wasn't nervous. I just wanted to say I appreciate everyone who's been speaking out, but this isn't just about me. Stuff like this happens all the time to people who don't have a CEO for a mom, people who don't have anyone fighting for them. And that's the real problem. I took a breath. So, if you care about what happened to me, start paying attention to what happens to other people too. Speak up when you see something wrong. Don't wait until it's trending. He paused, then added, because next time it might not be a CEO's kid, and they'll need your voice more than I do. He hit stop, then, without overthinking it, he uploaded the video. And just like that, Liam Bennett took back his story. What neither Liam Bennett nor Emily Collins knew was that, within hours, Liam Bennett's video would go viral. Within a day, the airline would release Emily Collins' statement, and people wouldn't buy it. Within a week, the company would be forced to address systemic discrimination within its ranks. And within a month, Liam Bennett would be sitting in front of a national TV anchor, being asked what he wanted to change. Because this wasn't just about one bad flight. This was about something bigger, and Liam Bennett had just stepped into a fight much larger than himself. Liam Bennett sat in the back seat of the car as it rolled smoothly through the city streets. His mother, Ava Bennett, sat beside him, her phone buzzing every few minutes with updates. Messages from executives, corporate teams scrambling to manage the growing attention, and news outlets requesting interviews. She glanced over at him, seeing the way he was staring out the window, his face thoughtful. "You okay?" she asked. Liam Bennett nodded, but she knew her son well enough to know when something was weighing on him. She let a few seconds of silence pass before she spoke again. "You know, once something like this gets out, it's hard to pull it back in." Liam turned his head. "I know." She studied him. "You sure you want to be in the middle of this?" he asked. He let out a slow breath. "I didn't want to be in it, but I already am, aren't I?" Ava Bennett nodded slightly. "Yeah, you are." Liam tapped his fingers against his knee. I don't want people to think I did this for attention." Ava smiled. "You didn't. And anyone who actually listens to what you said will know that." Liam leaned his head back against the seat. He had never expected any of this. A few hours ago, all he wanted was to take a simple flight. Now he had somehow become the center of a national conversation, and it wasn't slowing down. His phone buzzed. A notification popped up. 5,000 new comments on his video. He didn't even have the energy to read them all, but he noticed one that stood out. Tasha writes, "Liam, you have no idea how many people needed to hear this. I've been in your shoes before. I didn't have a powerful parent to fight for me. Thank you for speaking up." Liam read the comment twice. His heart felt strange. Heavier, but in a good way. He had never thought of himself as someone who could change anything. He was just a kid, but maybe, just maybe, his voice mattered more than he realized. Meanwhile, across the city, Emily Collins sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen making her face look even more exhausted than she felt. The statement she had signed was now public. The airline had released it, and within minutes, the backlash started. People didn't believe her apology. They called it fake, forced damage control. Her name wasn't in the official reports, but people figured it out. The emails started pouring in. Old colleagues, strangers, even distant family members. Some were messages of support, others were not. And then there were the news reports. Airline employee suspended after bias incident, a sign of systemic problems. Passengers speak out. This has been happening for years. CEO's son sparks national conversation on racial profiling in travel. Emily Collins rubbed her temples. Her name would never carry the same weight again. And worse, she couldn't shake the image of Liam Bennett's face when she made him move. At the time, it had felt right. It had felt normal. Yet, as she sat alone with the quiet hum of her thoughts, a painful question gnawed at her conscience. How many other innocent children had borne the brunt of her hasty assumptions, judged and sidelined before a single word of inquiry could be offered? For years she had reassured herself that she was merely doing her job, that every action was justified by the demands of duty. But now, for the first time, she was forced to confront the possibility that she might have been wrong all along. With a heavy heart, she closed her laptop and pressed her hands against her face, the truth settling in like an unavoidable verdict. Back in Liam Bennett's room that night, the house was quiet. The city outside buzzed with life, but in his bedroom, Liam sat alone in the soft glow of his bedside lamp, scrolling through his phone. More news, more messages, more people talking about what happened to him. His stomach twisted. He hadn't meant to start a movement. He had just wanted to be treated fairly. But now, it wasn't just about him anymore. And maybe that was a good thing. His phone buzzed. A new message. "Mom, get some sleep, baby. We have a lot to talk about tomorrow." He sighed and set his phone down, the stillness of the room contrasting sharply with the turmoil in his heart. Tomorrow the conversation would still be unfolding. Tomorrow debates would rage on, with some dismissing his experience as insignificant, while others would stand in solidarity with him. And for those who truly understood his pain, he knew he had to keep pushing forward. Liam pulled his blanket over himself and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the fight continued, and he was ready for it. From this story, we learn that power and responsibility always come hand in hand. The incident on the flight isn't just a personal mishap. It serves as a strong reminder of how biases and social prejudices can hurt people. Even if someone is experienced or holds a high position at work, letting stereotypes guide decisions can cause harm not only to the individual directly affected, but also to the wider community. The mistake wasn't just about failing to follow proper procedures. It was also about judging someone based solely on appearance, without fairness or empathy. This story shows the strength of using your voice when you've been wronged, and the importance of standing up for yourself. It emphasizes that real change starts with owning up to your mistakes, learning from them, and doing better next time. In today's society, where every action can be exposed and quickly spread online, every person must take responsibility for their decisions. This creates a more fair and humane environment for everyone. It reminds us all to be thoughtful and respectful in every choice we make. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe the flight attendant got the outcome she deserved? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Your support makes more stories like this possible.